When produced in great number on stage, feather flowers can be really beautiful. A lot of people ask me why I make my own feather flowers, and there are many, many reasons. One, I'm an arts and crafts guy. I love making things, and feather flowers are one of the things that I learned. My mother was a florist, so I got some wonderful tips. I actually learned how to make feather flowers from the L&L Publishing book, My Canes and Candles, by Fantasio, and I would recommend, if you can find that book, that you get it. There's an entire section dedicated to making and using feather bouquets with his canes and candles, and that's where a lot of the information came from that I use to make flowers. You're probably better off buying them. People ask, how easy are them to make? How easy are they to make? You'd probably be better off buying them, because it's a pain. It's a big pain in the butt, and it takes a long time, and you get nice little sore fingers by the time you're done. I make them for a number of reasons. Like I said, number one, I enjoy making them. Number two, they're going to go through hell when I use them, and I always feel weird about paying a large amount of money for a single sleeve bouquet and then putting it through the ringer and having it look terrible by the time I'm done using it. So these I can always just I can beat them up, and it's easy for me to make more of them. I also want to produce them in numbers. These in particular are coming out of a giant square circle, so to make them in numbers, it's easier for me rather than buying them. They're very expensive. If you get them from Hughes or Abbott's, you can pay quite a bit of money just for one bouquet. And when you're talking about doing 12 or 24 bouquets even, it's a lot of money. And the last thing really is that you kind of get what you want. I mean, these are not going to be nearly as good as Hughes or Abbott's, but they're mine, and they're just fun to do, and for me. But this is going to be a little over-the-shoulder view of how I actually make the bouquets, because I've had a lot of questions about how I make them, and what I use to make them, and where you can get the supplies, and I thought you all might find it interesting, so stay tuned. Okay, here we are. Now I want first of all to say, please pardon me and the stammering and the going off on tangents and everything, but I haven't scripted this. This is just how I make the flowers. There's a few things you're going to need. We'll go over the supplies list. And the first thing obviously you're going to need is feathers. Now you want 3 different colors to make a single bouquet. These are a special feather. They're called goose feathers. They're goose swimming feathers. They're hard to get now. I'll give you the name of the place where I get my feathers. I live in New York, so it's easy for me to drive into the city, into the fabric district. And there's a place called High Trim and Feather Store. That's H-A-I. That's how you spell the high. And they do have a website where you can get the feathers. It's hightrimstore.com, HAITRIMSTORE.com. And there you can find a section with feathers, and there's goose feathers. They actually come in a trim where there's a ribbon attached to them, and what you end up having to do is cut the ribbon off. Normally when you make feather flowers, the feathers are sanded on the bottom. The quill is actually sanded down on one side, and it gives it kind of a nice curl like this, and it makes the feather a lot easier to work with and a lot less bulky. With these particular feathers, I've got the trim feathers from Highs. You don't need to do that. They've already sanded them down for you. If you find goose swimming feathers, and you need to do that, what you can do is use a Dremel tool with a couple of pieces of tape wrapped around the little grinding wheels so that only the center section of the grinding wheel shows, and then you just very carefully sand away a little bit of the feather quill right here in the middle. Now, the other nice thing about the Highs feathers is that they're already dyed, and they come in some really brilliant colors. We're going to use a green for the leaves, obviously, and then we've got the yellow, which are going to be my petals, and the red will be the little inside of the flower. And there's a couple of other things you need. You need spring steel music wire. Now, I made Azra forms at one point, so I have a bunch of this laying around. You can get it online. This is it right here. It comes in packages like this, a coil inside of there. This is spring-tempered wire that's diameter 0.041 or 1.041 millimeters. It comes from Precision Brand, and you can get this, like I said, online. They come in these rolls, and it's really not very expensive. So go ahead. You're going to be left with a lot of spring steel wire left over. Now, something very important I want to mention about this. You see that? That's from a mishap with spring steel wire. So be very careful using this. It can suddenly uncoil and stick you and cause a lot of problems. While you're making these, it's a good idea to wear safety glasses because you're going to be cutting wire, and then pieces are going to be flying around if if you're not careful. And all you need is one to hit you in the wrong place, and you're out of luck. So that's the other thing. Now, to mount the wires with the feathers, you're going to need a couple of things. You're going to need some floral wire. This is all messed up, but you can get this at Joann's or Michael's or any place where they sell floral supplies. It's just a green thread or a green wire. You also need floral tape, which looks like this. I'm using some I got from Joann's. It's Ashland floral tape, green tape. Now, I'll show you how to use this stuff. It isn't as good as it used to be. The older stuff that I used to get from my mother worked a lot better. You need a scissors, which I happen to have right here. These these little scissors are great. Be sure that you get a pair of scissors that you don't care about, and in the end you may end up using it only for these, because if you use the nice scissors, you're gonna wreck them. So be sure you get one that you don't care about. You're also going to need a needle nose pliers, which I have here. You're going to need some copper wire. This is to put all the blooms together into the bouquet at the very end. It's a very, very thin wire. What you do is you get a cheap extension cord and you cut it and you strip all of the copper wire out of it, and you end up with these very fine wires that you can use to wrap and solder. You also are going to need some cotton balls, and you will need the soldering, the solder that you're going to need to put them together. I use just a regular lead-free solder. This one's Odie Safe Flow lead-free solder, and most importantly, soldering paste flux. This is what's going to make it stick. That's kind of the trick to soldering spring steel wire. It's not really easy to do, but the real trick is the flux, and you need a brush to apply the flux, and you'll find it works really well. I also have a soldering gun. You want one that gets kind of hot. You want one. I'm using a Universal 140 100 watt Weller soldering gun. You can use something else if you like, but it should get pretty hot because you want the wire to stick, the solder to stick to the wire. Now that we have all our supplies, I'll put them together and let's get started. Okay, to start, you're going to need to cut your wire. You're going to need to make one bouquet. You will need 5 pieces of wire, one for the stem and the central stalk, and then you have the 4 blooms that come out. These are for a 5 bloom bouquet. Now you're going to want 5 pieces of wire about 12 to 13 inches long. This is my guide piece that I have. I've already measured it and cut it, so now I can take my pliers and carefully cut to match my guide piece. That's one. Again, be very careful with the spring wire, because it has a terrible tendency to just suddenly uncoil and get you. That's two. And then three. Now, these, when you cut these off of the spool, they're going to have a slight curve to them. That's fine. There's only one piece that you don't want to have that curve in, and that's the central stalk. And it's pretty easy just to take the bend out of it. So we'll cut this, and then one more for the central stalk, which I will make just a bit longer than the others, because you might want, it depends on what you want to do at the very end, and we'll talk about that, how you're going to be using these, whether it's a sleeve bouquet or whether it's a dart, flower dart to stick on the ground once you've produced it. Now you've got your wires. What you want to do is take the long wire that you cut, the central stalk, and you're going to bend it a little bit so it's straighter. Just kind of straighten it out. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just make sure that you can. All the blooms that are going to go on here, you don't want this one to curve. It's the only one you don't want to curve. The rest of them, it's kind of perfect that they come out curved like that, because that's the way they're going to look. Okay, so something like that. Your fingers are going to hurt, by the way, when you do this. It's rough on the fingertips, and I found that I can't do this and wear gloves at the same time, because it just doesn't work. It's hard to do. So just be careful not to cut yourself. And you make enough of these, you're going to get little guitar calluses, you know. Now, to start the stalk, what you're going to do, and we'll move this a little bit so you can see, I'm going to take the pliers, and about an inch from the end, you're going to bend a little hook, just like this. So you have a little hook on the very end. Now you take a cotton ball. You don't need the whole thing, just about half of it actually. And you kind of pull it out into a longer shape, and you roll it between your fingers to make a long cotton ball like this. You're going to take that cotton ball and you're going to stick it right in the hook and bring the ends up like this together, and then roll it and twist it between your fingers a little bit so it stays there for the moment. Okay? Now you take your pliers and you squish the hook shut like this so that the cotton ball is stuck in there, and that's where it stays. Alright? The next thing you need to do is take your floral tape, and you're going to take a long piece off. Don't cut it, and I'll show you why in just a second. You have to activate it. You're going to take the tape and just break it. You want a long piece, like about 6-7 inches. You can add more always. So now you have to activate it. It's not going to stick to anything right now. To kind of make it stick, it'll stick to itself, and to do that you stretch it out, and you'll see it kind of change color a little bit. That's the adhesive in there, and now you'll feel it's tacky. So what you do is about halfway up from the cotton ball, halfway up the cotton ball there, you start to wrap and twist. Now you want to really twist it together and really press it together. as you're doing that. What it does is it adheres to itself as you're twisting. Just like this. And keep going, start at the top and keep going down and roll so you're covering the stem, and keep twisting it between your fingers and rolling it so that it really adheres to itself. It's not going to adhere to the wire, it adheres to itself. It doesn't have to be perfect at first, because when you're putting the leaves on the stalk, it's going to be more detailed. But make sure, you just want it to be tight, so it doesn't unroll, really just kind of stick it on there. Just like that. All right. Now, I'll get another piece and just finish wrapping it. You don't want to wrap the whole thing. You just want to wrap down. You want to leave about 3 inches from the bottom unwrapped. And the reason for that is because you're going to solder it down there, and you don't want to have to pull the tape off or remove the tape, move it out of the way or whatever. So, and I think one more piece will do it. I'm not actually going to make the whole bouquet here on the camera for the sake of time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make one stalk, and then off camera I'll make the rest of the stalks, and then show you how to attach the stalks at the very end. So once you have that on there it is. Okay. Then there's your cotton ball at the end, which will be the inside of the flower. Now what you want to do, push this stuff out of the way just for the moment. What you want to do is get the feathers that are going to be the inside of the flower. You'll need 2 red feathers, or whatever color you're using, for the inside of the flower. And what you're going to do is cut the feather in half like this, and then cut here, and you'll find when you can pull the end of that feather off as well, just so it's nice and thin at the very bottom here. It makes it easier to tie on. And so you need to do 3 of those like that. You can make, I think in the book that I read, there was a template that you use to make, you kind of want this shape. You can make a little paper template and then trace your, use it to cut around. Now, I'm not going to be that careful about it because I'm just trying to do this quickly for the video. Alright, so there's your 3 little pieces of the inside of your feather. And what you're going to do is take them, you're going to take a piece of the floral wire, the steel thread, you're going to cut it. You want about 6 inches or so, like that. Must be kind of hard to see on the camera, but hopefully you can. You take the feather and place it on the tape just below the cotton ball. Then you take the wire and you wrap the wire around the base a couple of times. Not too tight. If you do it too tight, it's gonna cut the feather, and you don't want that to happen. So the next one you put just to the right of the first feather, and again you wrap it around. By the way, the shaved part of the feather should be on the outside, like that, and the third one goes in the space that's left over. Now, the idea here is just to hold the feathers on firmly like that. And then wrap the wire down a little bit over the rest of the stems, cut it off, and then lay the feather down along the, whatever's left of the wire, you lay that down along the stem like this. Now you get yourself another piece of tape, floral tape, and stretch it out like that to activate it. And you're going to wind that around just above the wire on the feather, and wind it down around so that the base of that, so the base of all where you did the wire and everything is covered. So all the wire is actually covered up. Okay? Just like that. Now you're going to apply the petals. I'm doing yellow petals on red. So what you're going to need is at least 5 feathers. This isn't going to look as good as it normally would because I'm going to do this kind of quickly. But again, trim the feathers down. Make sure that the idea really here when you're making a feather flower is that you're going to be pulling it out of a place of concealment, and that place of concealment needs to be, is a small space, like the inside of a garden of flowers cloth, or maybe the inside of a florbrella, or a square circle tube. So it needs to be able to compress. And I'll show you the trick to making it compress. There's another trick when you solder them together to making them compress and be as small as possible. You might even want to do one of these that goes on the inside of a vanishing cane. So when the cane vanishes, you're left over with the bouquet. And that really requires that the blooms be small. So now again, a slightly longer piece of steel thread or floral wire, and you do the same thing you did with the inside of the flower. You attach the petals to the outside, you just stick it on the tape. It won't stick, but lay it on the tape, and then use the wire to wrap around twice or 2 or 3 times with that shaved part on the outside. And then you do the same thing with all the feathers, just putting them next to each other, just like this. Not too rough or tight, just enough to make it stay in place. If you go too tight, it'll either cut the plume itself, or it will move it so that it's not in the spot you want. So here, the 4th one, and then one more. And I always like to look to see where does it look like it should go, and it looks like it should go right here. So we'll put that last one on, say right about there. Now you don't have to use, the less you can get away with using and make it still look like a flower, the better. Because again, the less you use, the less bulky this thing is. Don't bother trimming them yet. Don't bother trimming the long feathers. I usually leave them long. But some people like to trim them and make them look more like a actual flower petal. That's just the thing. I think when people look at these flowers during a performance, they know they're not real flowers. I mean, they don't look anything like a like a real flower. I mean, I've seen some flowers that really look like roses, or I've seen some pretty decent feather flowers, but that's about the only kind of feather flower I've seen that really looks like a flower. Usually they don't. I'm going to cut this off a little bit just to, so it's about the same as the other feathers. Otherwise, they really don't look like a flower. And I'll show you how to make these ends look really nice later. So now you need at least 4. If you have spots on there that look like it needs more feathers, to fill up spots in there, feel free to put more, but don't go too crazy, because otherwise it's not going to compress, and that's really what you want, is you want the bouquet to compress when ultimately when you're done with it, so it can fit inside the production devices, and it's inside of, and it also depends on where you're producing it from. I mean, like if you want to produce it from your sleeve or something like that, they don't need to compress nearly as much as if you were doing the inside of a floor umbrella or like a very thin tube, like in a garden of flowers or something like that, or inside of a cane or candle, vanishing candle. So now you need a little more thread here, a little more floral wire, and you're going to do the exact same thing that you've been doing. You just attach the green feathers around the outside of the petals, like this. Same idea. You want to be careful. Don't break the flower or cut it with the wire. And be sure. Also keep in mind that while you're doing this, that one I did upside down, but that's all right. Keep in mind that while you're doing this, you want to make it look as real as you can. Like I said, I don't think anyone ever believes that these are real flowers to begin with, but try to keep them nice and even and looking nice. I think it was David Seebach who told me, if you're going to do feather flowers in an act, go all the way with it. Don't produce 1 or 2, just because, unless it's a throwaway or something like that, don't just do 1 or 2. If you're going to make an act of producing feather flowers, you want a lot of flowers. You don't want to just produce a couple from a square circle or something like that. People know that they are not real flowers, and they probably understand that they compress. And at least that'll be, if it were me, that's the first thing I would think of anyway, even not as a magician, is, those flowers compress and fit into a small space. But when you start producing, I mean, if you look at Harry Blackstone's feather flower act, from years ago, I mean, it looked good, and it looked impossible. There were just so many of the flowers appearing, and you just didn't know where they were coming from. And, if he had just come out and changed the cane into a bouquet, I mean, like I said, unless it's like a throwaway or something like that, I wouldn't. But in my opinion, if you're going to do flowers, you should really go all the way and produce as many as you can. So once you have your flower petals around there and you've wrapped the tape around like you have with the rest, now you've got this nice head of a flower here. Now you need at least three more feathers. 3 more green feathers. And these are going to be the leaves on the stalk of the flower itself. I'm just taking the pieces of stem off that didn't get sanded, so it's nice, and there we go. Now you just take a little piece of wire like that, a little piece of floral wire, and about 2 or 3 inches down from the top, you're going to tie you're going to tie that leaf onto the stem like that. Cut off the rest of the wire and lay it down, pointing down along the stem. Now you get your floral wire, a smaller piece, stretch it out and activate it. And just above the wire where you tied it, twist it on, making sure it adheres to itself, nice and tightly. And there's your first petal, or your first leaf on the stem, rather. Now you do it again, a couple of more inches down. That'll be the second leaf. And again, you just want a little piece of wire, and you tie that on as well, like this. And cut off the excess, take a piece of tape, activate it by stretching it out like this, and this is the part where that's really going to do a job on your fingers, is all this twisting and using your fingers on the wire. That, that's what really gets them to feel gross by the end of one bouquet. You'll start to feel it even halfway through the first one. And my goal for this particular session of my flower making, I'm making 6 yellow blooms with a red inside. I'm making 6 red blooms with a yellow inside, and those are all coming out of a square circle production. We've got this here. That's the third one. Now for the central stalk, you may want more than just 3 feathers. I've always just used 3 for all the exterior stalks, the exterior blooms that go on the central stalk. But you could use like maybe one more down closer to the bottom. You don't want to go too close to the bottom. You'll be able to attach more of these after you've, I forgot to activate the tape, after you've soldered all the pieces together. Then you can add more feathers where needed, but you don't want feathers down where you're going to be soldering, because you don't want to burn them. So that is the central stalk. It's not trimmed or made real nice. But this is the way you want it. This is all you need, right, to start off with. So now that I've made one, you're going to make 4 more with the pieces of wire that are here. All right. And when you're done with those, then we're going to attach them all together. And I'm going to go ahead and make the other 4 off camera, and we will come back and show you how to attach them together into a bouquet. Okay, I have now finished the other 4 blooms for the bouquet. So we should have now 4 blooms and 1 central stalk that is straight. Now, I have not yet found a really good way to do this part. I'm guessing that you could use some kind of jig or some kind of special holder, or you could just use another pair of hands and do the attachment this way. But I'll show you what I have been doing, and if anybody has something better, just leave something in the comments or on the Facebook group, and we can see if that actually works better. But this is the way that I've been assembling the bouquet after the blooms are complete. Now, here's the big secret as to how the blooms fit inside a cane or a candle, if you were doing cane to bouquet or candle to bouquet. And that is the way that the blooms are arranged around the center stalk. Now the center stalk goes here, and what you want to do is you want to attach the other stalks so that when they come together at the top, when you squish them down, one bloom, the next bloom falls below the first, just like this. And then this one you would attach so this one falls below the other two blooms. So what you get is this very, very flat or very compressed tube of flower. You could actually fit the flowers right inside of a tube, which is what you do. But it's important that they're attached that way so that one bloom lies slightly below the next bloom while when they're compressed. So what I need to do first is figure out where that's going to be. Now, by the way, if you were just using this as a sleeve bouquet or something like that, something to produce from a square circle, you wouldn't really need to worry too much about the blooms lying one below the other like that. But I think it's a good practice because then you could use the blooms in any sort of situation. They'll compress much smaller. So what I'm going to do is with a piece of wire, of floral wire, I'm going to take the central stalk and two of the blooms and attach them together, or just bind them together with the wire. And I'm going to do that in the portion that is covered by the tape. So just wind around, attaching, binding those two together, and then cut off the excess, like so. Careful not to poke yourself. Now, after that, I'm going to lie the blooms down like this so that they form this pattern. Two come out this way, flat from the central stalk this way, so they come out at right angles. Now, find yourself something, probably not wood like I'm using, but something heat resistant, something that you can solder on. And what you're going to do is on the metal part of the three stalks, you're going to take some flux, some of that flux paste, and you're going to put it right on there, all around it. This is what's going to help the solder. It's going to clean the metal and make the solder stick. Next, you're going to take your solder and take your solder gun, and you're going to solder those three pieces together making a nice bead of solder, a little on the longer side so it'll stick. Make sure it sticks to all three. Again, this is one of those things, I'm sure there's a better way to do this. In terms of how this is held while it's being soldered. You may simply just want to use another pair of hands. In fact, what I'm going to do with this particular one, just because they're bent a little crazy, is I'm going to bind them again below the point I want to solder with another length of floral wire, just so it's all bound together and keeping that wire nice and tight against each other, just like that. And I can remove that after it's been soldered. So now lay it out like you want it. We'll add just a little more flux there. Now we'll try doing it this way, and this should hold better. And again, if anyone can figure out, some kind of jig or something. Now that's actually a nice good bead along the very, very good. Okay. Give that a second to dry. Kind of harden up. I can see it working here. And again, I'm just using regular old safe flow lead-free solder. I've heard people say you need silver solder and you need this, you need that, but I haven't found that to be the case at all. Now the blooms are together and they're not going to rotate around the center stalk because of the solder. The next part, this is where it gets kind of crazy, is to attach the other two pieces. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stick them in a hole that I drilled in the wood here. Bend them so they're straight. And I'm going to try doing it this way. Let's take all the pieces and stick them through the hole. This hole may not be big enough. Back. Yeah, I'm going to drill a bigger hole. Okay, I've drilled a bigger hole here and stuck the wires through the hole. And you can see they're in the configuration that I want. I want them to hold nice and steady while I'm soldering so that this doesn't rotate and move around. And you can use some more wire to kind of whip those parts together, just like that. Now add some flux down here at the bottom. And all I want to do is get a nice bead of solder on there, and then that'll just hold it in place. See if I can get this to work. Heat up the wire, add the solder. Okay, that looks like that might be good. Okay. Whoops. We'll see if that... Okay, that looks like that's holding nicely. So now what I'll do is pull that out, lay it down here, whoops, and try to get another bead of solder down just a little bit lower, right about here. Just a little lower so that it's nice and secure. Lay something heavy on there. Right below that first bead there. This really is the trickiest part of it. And like I said, just try to work out some way. If if anybody has a better way, certainly go ahead and use that. Let that dry a little bit. Now, what we've got are some blooms here that are fitting nicely. And what I'm going to do right now, just to make this a little bit easier, is take the pliers and I'm going to cut all except the central stalk. I'm going to cut the excess wire off. Just like this. Now you've got the central stalk and the other pieces here. Now there's one more piece to attach, and I don't think that my jig will fit all of them, so we'll just make that a little wider and see if I can get everything in there. See if we can get that last stalk to fit. I should mention that when Fantasio made his, he actually stuck all of these pieces down inside of a nut and soldered them that way. Of course, though, those were meant to fit inside canes and candles, and mine, I just want a ring at the end of mine. Just like that. Yeah, with the canes and candles you attach a screw and a nut at the end that will attach to the candle or the cane. There we go. And that's how it attaches to the cane. Anyone who doesn't have the, incidentally, if you like cane and candle work, I would highly, highly recommend the Fantasio My Cane and Candles books from L&L Publishing. I don't know if it's still available. I bought it quite a while ago, but maybe you can find it used. Put a little bit of flux on there and see if I can get a bead of solder. There we go. So what you've got are two, this is a little more, what you've got are two bouquets that stick out at right angles in one direction and two bouquets that stick out at an angle in another direction. Okay. And these should be nice and steady, nice and even. This is kind of hard to see, I understand that. And last but not least, let's just take that bead of solder and kind of, it became a nice ball instead of a bead here, so let's kind of, there we go, that's better. Give that a second to, and there you go. You can see you got kind of a cross going there. I'm going to cut off that last bit of wire. And you can see everything's now cut except for the central stalk. Now for security, I'm going to take some more. I'm going to take some more of this wire, which is all tangled in a ball right now, and I'm going to cut off a piece and bind all of the stalks together with the solder and all the way down to where I've cut, and back up again, just to keep it all in order. Trim it off, and this you're going to cover all this with tape. So get your floral tape, stretch it out to activate it, and starting up here, start taping a little bit down. Don't go all the way down because you're just going to be bending this part here back up anyway, and you'll just have to tape over it again. So just squishing it together and keeping that tape active by squishing it with your fingers and your body heat. Just like that. And cover up the solder and cover up the wire that you use to bind. Now there's something I actually forgot to do, and I mentioned that to you. Whenever you're soldering something together like that, the piano wire, use this, wind this copper wire around the joint where you're going to join it, and that makes it easier. I didn't really explain that, but you're using that thin copper wire and wrapping your joint, and then you're soldering with the flux over the top of the whole thing. But I didn't explain that before, I'm sorry. Now, last but not least, I'm going to take this wire here, and since this is coming out of a square circle, I don't really need it to I don't really need it to be a loop or anything like that. If it was a loop, all you do is bend it around into a loop and attach the rest up here with some wire and some tape. But in this case, I don't need that, so I'm just going to bend it into a hook shape and squish it shut like that, and cut off a little bit of the excess. This will hold pretty steady, so I don't even have to put wire on that. We'll just take a little bit of tape, just a tiny bit, over the top of that. Now, there are a couple of finishing touches that you can opt to do here. I'll show you what I mean. The first thing you can do is that you see you've got all the space right here. You know, all the space where there's nothing. Now you could very well take, in fact I'm going to take a couple of green feathers, a couple of leaf feathers, and attach them down here where that join is. Just cover everything up, you know. And that'll also hold everything even firmer than it'll hold everything firmer. So we'll just put a couple down there real quick. We'll just put one, and again, you just need a couple of turns around these. You don't want to crank them on there, and because that will make the feather, will cut the feather quill, and it won't stick anymore. And let's put the other one over here on this side. Tear off some of that stem that's too thick. Put it over here on this side. Like this. Wind that around. Like that. And maybe even one more. One more right here. Just put it right here, and you can see that that adds a really nice finishing touch. The only thing you have to do now is make sure the feathers are placed where you want. Take some tape, and go around those feathers. The base of those feathers where they're joined to the stalk with the tape, and you can see it really does look good there. You can see it pops open very, very nicely. Okay, there's one more thing. Now there's one more thing I wanted to show you before we end this video, and that is the finishing touch that you can use. I have a special scissors here. It's called a pinking shears. This is used to fix the edges of don't know how to explain it. It actually fixes the edges of fabric. You cut the edges of fabric, it keeps it from unraveling. So you can get this at any Joann's or sewing store. But one of the neat things is that it has that zigzag pattern you can see here on the blade, so that when you take a feather and you cut it in this carefully in this sort of a round shape here, you see you get this nice effect. Looks sort of like a flower petal. And I did everything that you just saw very, very quickly. You can really take your time and go through your feathers and find, the nicest feathers out of the bunch that you can get. And you can even cut off some of this down that's around here, unless you like that. I mean, it all depends on what look you like. And you can have all the petals look like that. And you can do it after the fact too. Once you're done with the bouquet itself, you can trim all of the petals around so it looks nice. And I don't know, I mean, they have the pinking shears here, and that's what I've been using, and I think that's what's recommended in the Fantasio book. But you can get different kind of scissors. I've seen them at Joann's that have little cutting patterns, different patterns that you can cut into things. I think they're meant for paper, to cut different edges on paper and that sort of thing. But look around. Look around the craft stores, Joann's, AC Moore, see what you can find. Whatever you do, don't use turkey feathers to make these things. It looks terrible. It looks like it's like I said, it's already kind of sad that they end up looking like a feather duster, but the turkey feathers will make that even worse. So don't use those. Use nice goose swimming feathers that you can find. And I'll post this on the Magic Forum, and we'll actually leave the URL there as to where you can get this. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Sorry it took so long, and have a good one.